There's two parts. The first part is called Lingering Under Time, Slowness, Witnessing, and the Decolonial Image, Shelagh Keeley's Colonial Gardens and the Politics of Perception. Shelagh Keeley's installation, Jardin de Ultramar, the Colonial Garden, visualizes a colonial garden which hosted members of an ethnic group from the Bijagos archipelago in Guinea-Bissau during the Portuguese World Exhibition in 1940. This Portuguese World Exhibition put them on display, setting them up as a human zoo. It was also called the Overseas Garden or the Tropical Botanical Garden. It embodied the atmospheres prescribed by colonial gardens, taxonomies, order, and the spectral violence of colonial quiet. Its ideations exceeded the visible architectures of glass and steel. For beyond the monumental presence of these colonial structures lay the true force of domination, colonial atmospheres, regimes of perception, and knowledge that persist into the present. It is precisely this lingering atmospheres that Keeley brings to light. This regime of colonial atmosphere stages a split between artifice and nature in the colonial staging of the garden. Keeley responds through the visual practices of slowness, repetition, sounding off of a sort of visual affect. Keeley's work operates at levels of the perceptual in its historical reckoning. Her work unsettles the colonial residues embedded in atmosphere, tempo, and image. She also offers a poetics that is not about recognition, representation, or identity, but rather it offers us a mode of undoing temporal and atmospheric forms of domination. The historical role of greenhouses and botanical gardens cannot be separated from their origins as imperial instruments of perceptual control. Traditionally, greenhouses symbolize an artificial yet meticulously controlled environment where flora and fauna were displayed for scientific, economic, and political purposes. Greenhouses were not living landscapes, but rather they were closed, curated spaces. They were finite, non-porous, designed for observation rather than communion with nature, colonization. Here, plants and animals, and in the related logic of the cabinet of curiosities, the Wunderkammer, even human species were subjected to static displays that inscribed colonial narratives of grotesquerie and domination. Classical greenhouses, with their glass and steel structures, resembled hollow showboxes replete with plants, evoking a sense of static comfort and the schism mirrorings of colonialism's penchant to stage the gap between the real and the perceived. Here again was the flora and fauna, caught in a preset setting, featuring a silent show, offering a potentially morbid sense of the interstices between the natural and the artificial. These spaces often became imperial atmospheres, imperial amphitheaters, where nature was managed, manipulated, and commanded. Such sentiment could be captured in critiques of the 19th century European dioramas that arranged creatures, flora, and fauna to assert a theatralized power dynamic between creature and subject, between watcher and watched, between viewer and the nature behind the glass. These were all functioning as living museums that perpetuated Western ideologies of nature as idyllic, mythical, and domesticated landscapes, masking the violent destruction, subjection, and extraction underlying these practices. The taxonomic classifications, scientific racism that emerged from these spaces were tightly embedded with colonial ambitions. The taxonomy, that is to say the colonial classification of plants, animals, and humans, created a projected hierarchy of knowledge that justified exploitation. The propagated tales of enchanted gardens were colonial fabulations, veiling the anthropocentric ends and means, all under the auspices of imperial competition. Violent epistemologies narrated eviscerations under the guise of benevolent nationalisms and their accompanying superiorities. As Morton 1981 states, botanical amphitheaters reflecting Enlightenment ideals of taxonomy would oversee a surge that introduced in 100 years more than 20 times as many plants in Europe than in the 2,000 years prior. They were capturing bodies, plants, animals, and souls in these colonial gardens. Such imperial grammars are precisely what Shelagh Keeley's Jardin de Ultramar, the colonial garden, responds to. Through a decelerated poetics, she offers a sense of dispersion and the views of the residual logic of the imperial past. She offers us a view of its slow grind, its seething underbelly. We see forms of disassembly, undoing not only the images of colonial dominion, but the temporal and sensory frameworks that held them in place. Such an entry into the sort of optical unconscious of colonial histories seems an urgent task right now within a proliferating industry of so-called decolonial critique that often has lost touch with thinkers like Frantz Fanon and his early perceptual phenomenological investigations. A true entry into the perceptual strivings of colonialisms brings us into a certain set of viewings of its inner strivings, of what I would refer to as the overlords and underlords. Here I refer to the temporal and atmospheric forms of domination. Keeley sees the greenhouse and botanical gardens as a double phantom. The colony, one might say, has both an overlord and underlord, recognizing both its visible conscious and its invisible unconscious dominations. The greenhouse in Keeley's imaginary is both spectral oversight and undersight, where we are witness to colonially pregnant images that move through a lingering over and lingering under, that both line the imperial belly. In essence, the viewer is led first along the vertical panopticons of these regimes, and then gently coaxed into the embedded registers below these regimes. We are speaking about the overarching as well as what I would call the underarchings of these regimes, of colonial imprintings. We are talking about the imperial magisterial, what is above, and the colonial seething below. All these colonial impressions and atmospheres of domination that happen visibly, consciously, and invisibly, unconsciously. In the Jardin de l'Ultramar, the colonial garden, we witness the such. We witness Keeley's images that allow us to breathe in and then out. And thus what is emergent from these slow yet incessant impressions are ineffable, phantomal distillations. In her Jardin de l'Ultramar, the colonial garden, we find a truncated, slow image that whispers these histories. As with fellow contemporary of the Jardin de l'Ultramar, the Colonial Agricultural Museum of Lisbon, created in the early 20th century, they were simultaneously sites for science, instruction, and dissemination at the center of imperial metropolis. The Jardin de l'Ultramar, the tropical botanical garden, was founded and created in 1906 by Portugal's King Carlos with similar missions to its contemporary gardens, with focuses on tropical botanica, as with other such imperial amphitheaters. It was the site of the colonial collection of flora, fauna, and in its specific iteration of human bodies. As Keeley states, patronized by Portugal's ruling dictator, Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, this tropical garden was appropriated into the 1940 Portuguese World Exhibition and used as a human zoo, where 138 persons were brought from 7 colonies, and in a degrading human spectacle, they were forced to live and perform in the garden. Keeley's film, in many respects, in its interstitial moments, seems to inculcate these muffled voices and their articulation of their histories behind the glass and steel. In Shelagh Keeley's Jardin de l'Ultramar, the colonial garden, we find a total truncating stillness. Ultimately, we are held as viewers. There is no sooner a gesturing towards a total truncating stillness. Ultimately held as viewers, there is no sooner a gesturing towards a release from the very loaded yet at once banalized images we find ourselves caught in. We are consistently made to feel the revealing and concealment of image by image. The orchids, the greenhouse, the peacock, the amphitheater, the cryptothèque. Staring deeply and then moreover deeply with the screen, we are seized by the very atmospheres and temporalities of the individual units and the succession of images. We are led into looking at what becomes indefatigable, obsessive, enigmatic, and ultimately epistolary. There are messages being jettisoned, shadows, tranquility, stasis. We stare incessantly, caught not only by the image, but by our act of looking. That devout looking with, and then from looking with to a looking in. We enter the duration of her images at their most elemental phenomenological structures, where perception is no longer merely visual, but where it is weighted, embedded, haunted by the histories of the durational displays of foreign bodies once exhibited. We first look with the images almost side by side with them. Then our looking shifts from being alongside the images to looking into them. In the deeper looking, we enter the very time of the images, not just their surface. At that point, seeing isn't just about a vision anymore. It becomes heavier, it becomes more layered, it becomes something carrying with the weight of history. Her images remind us of the painful past, how in colonial exhibitions, people from other parts of the world were once put on display like objects. That history still haunts the way we look today. And Keeley's work makes us feel that haunting. This durational immersion is not merely aesthetic. It is structural. It is deliberate and strategic. The slowed-down image in Shelagh Keeley's work is not a formal strategy alone. It activates a deeper structure that goes against the normative speed and representational narration. It elaborates a politics of seeing. Through recursive acts of looking, repelling, and delay, these images do not offer a surface representation. These images open a field of temporal recursion, drawing the viewer into the space of the image, into the suspended moment that both holds and withholds. Keeley's images surpass the mainstay of the colonial acts that simply look at the colonial corpus. Instead, she looks at how the very atmospheres have been colonized. There is a colonization of the air. There's a colonization of space. There is a colonization of rhythm. There's a colonization of temporality. Through an atmospheric heuristic, a tool of understanding, she is beckoning a proto-politics of actually decolonizing how we see them dismantling tempos, how we see them dismantling atmospheric pressure and the durations that underpin colonial regimes. We are not so much simply brought into the specific scenes of each regime as much as we are thrust into the layered architectures of that time and the elaborations of the particular spatial containers, the garden, that held and holds colonial breath and murt. Across these overgrown ecologies, Keeley accumulates atmospheric and temporal terrains, shining a very somber light on the structural violence of imposed memorials and rhythms. The central motif, the colonization of the bodies, but moreover the colonization of time in itself, emerges not simply in how formulations of Western time have imposed hegemonic chronologies, but in the deeper occupation of memory. Memory is dominated within memory. Memory is dominated within memory dominated. There is a kind of mise en abîme we are made to fall into. This architecture is not neutral. Rather, it is shaped by imperial formations that continue to nourish past colonialisms in the present. These formations operate most effectively through the barely visible, through what Anne Stoler describes as the less visible elements of soil and sound and soul, through what she calls a sensory regime gouged into the present sensibilities. These sensory regimes are what I would name atmospheres as ideological inheritances. They are precisely what Keeley approaches and confronts. Her slowed-down images and our durational gaze upon them operate inside the sensory sedimentations of imperial architectures. These are spaces where perception was managed and shaped to reinforce colonial dominance. Greenhouses, botanical gardens, and museum vitrines are exemplary instances of this perceptual control. They were never only about flora and plants and gardens or display. They were always about symbolic violence and a certain kind of capturing. I propose the concepts of lingering over and lingering under, as witnessed in Keeley's train of images. There is a constant moving between both of these poles of lingering over and lingering under in the presentation of images. There are speculative fabulations, and there are the accumulated trains of images that ultimately hold a tension articulated in this distinction between a lingering over and a lingering under. The former, a lingering over, appears as a hegemonic gesture, as an imperial overflight, colonialism's panoptic forming eye. The latter, the lingering under, is the subterranean, enfleshed mode of colonialism's invisible entrenchments. Keeley practices not just an intervention in the visible, but she also intervenes but rather there is a bridge between visibilities. It is at once, it lulls sensory, unseen dimensions. It is a lulling that draws the viewer into a certain complicity with and to the image. We are invited to stay and linger with the images. Her work becomes at once a phenomenology of acquiescence and resistance, different from the head-on colonial plan. She shows us how to see differently, away from representation, and ultimately she shows us how to unpack the image that seems to not haunt, but ultimately does haunt us. The images move continually, oscillating between a lingering over and a lingering under, between what dominates and what in hushed tones insidiously dwells. It is within this interval, the space between the two gestures of lingering, that Keeley draws our gaze toward interruption, vulnerability, resistance. In this deceleration, in the act of seeing between these lingerings, she imparts to us another mode of vision, one through which we might perceive hegemony itself, something that's scarcely visible, yet she reveals it in slow motion. Keeley's images don't show things directly or obviously. Instead, they move between two modes. I need some water. What is loud and dominant, the obvious, the visible, power, and what is quiet and hidden, the subtle underlying presence of domination. So to repeat, Keeley's images don't show things directly or obviously. Instead, they move between two modes: what is loud and dominant, the obvious and the visible, and what is quiet and hidden, the subtle underlying presence of domination. Keeley draws attention to the space in between these two. It is a space of tension, where neither is fully stable. In that gap, she invites us to notice things that are normally overlooked, moments of interruption, fragility, and resistance. By slowing us down, by making us linger rather than rush through her work, she teaches us to see power differently, not in its grand, flashy forms, but in its slower, almost invisible movements that still shape our world. Here with Keeley's gaze, the viewer is not just a witness, but becomes an agent, fabricated inward. With Keeley's gaze, the viewer is not simply a passive witness. Instead, the act of looking turns inward, shaping the viewer into an active participant. Her work draws us into a space where perception is not just about observing what is before us, but about being transformed by it, as though the image itself fabricates an interior response, making us into agents within her image who experience rather than just being mere onlookers. The viewer is drawn into the wound of time, under its tree, under its image, in a stream of life, interrupted. The interruption becomes a methodology. The interruption becomes a refusal to move on. The interruption is a lingering, not as passivity, but there is a resistance to tempo. There's a resistance to the settler tempo, to the colonial metronome. Keeley's Jardin du Ultramar asks us quite a bit of its viewers. She asks us to sit through a reconstitution of time. Moving away from the forward motion of the so-called liberation project, here with Keeley, to quote a hip-hop song, we are told to lean back, to move with and through the loaded flow of time, like an exhausted detective taking it all in, not in the visible, but also in the invisible. She is reminding us that the legacies of empire are often much less visible, but they are suspended in time, right in time for a meticulous and patient dismantling of colonial atmospheres. So I want to change things up, Shelagh. I want you to come out earlier, and then I can read some stuff from the other text, because I don't want to keep just shouting at everybody. I want us to have start the conversation right away, and we can do the questions. I can read some of the stuff, because I don't want it to just be a lecture. So before I was going to read a second part, but I would rather than mystifying people with words, have Shelagh come in and we can start shooting back and forth. Now, one of the things to make things a little lighter here is that Shelagh and I in some ways come from the same generation. We grew up in the club scene. Well, I can say that I grew up in the club scene, and we found this out recently. And we grew up with slow cinema. And I find like there's a way of seeing the world in this slow time, which is a little different than, and it's not to speak down to the new generation, but I feel like we have a different way of seeing things. So I want to maybe get into that a little bit. Maybe we can begin with that. And I don't know if you have any reflections on what I read. I felt a little nervous reading, so I wanted to just kind of slow things down a little bit. Do you want to riff, or do you want to riff on what I just said, or do you want me to ask a question? What would you like to do?
Ask me a question, I think.
Okay. So in this film, you demand a lot of the viewer. You're demanding the viewer to be slow, and you're demanding the viewer. In your installation, Jadam the Ultramar seems to demand the viewer to linger and not to consume. You're asking them to be in slow time with you. How do you think about slowness as an ethical gesture in image making?
Wow. Well, I think, you know that when I experienced the garden, I kept being quite obsessed to keep going back. But it's interesting when you use the word detective. I mean, nothing was written about this garden. No one I met knew anything about it. So I kept going back and absorbing, getting into it, sort of but a lot of questioning. And feeling something very ominous, or just, it's hard to articulate, but the slowness I would put down to just the moving through the garden, and then coming back. I was there over 2 weeks, but to keep coming back to the space, spending time with it, and then through the film, I think, the viewer through slow time, space-time, actually becomes like I was, moving through the garden and then forming questions of their own about it.
Okay. I'm going to start reading some of part 2, and then you can maybe just riff on that, because I would rather break it up than just shout at people. So in part 1, I traced how systems of knowledge and perception shape and mask violent destruction, subjection, and extraction. These systems of knowledge and perception operate through visible and invisible techniques that form certain types of space and time. The question is, what can be done in these structures? What forms of resistance become our way out and our way to see and reveal the violence behind these systems? What we have been proposing is that a slow approach to cinema, what philosophers refer to as a decelerated practice, can allow us to take a step back and to see into the optical unconscious of these systems of power. Keeley offers us a slow walk through the images of the colonial garden. Her form of showing her images are a form of counter-narrative to the colonial narrative of subjection, imperialism, and racism. We are able to step back and see these modes of power in their slow presentation. There's no shouting or dazzle in Keeley's images. They rest, they pulse slowly with the urgency of a slow revealing. There is a return to what was buried, silenced, and atmospherically veiled. We are not in the tempo of accelerated image of our consumption society. Her durational installation resists this. Her framing is asking us to remain just here, not over there. She is asking us to remain with not just what is seen, but also with what is being withheld. Her slow poetics is less an indictment than a vibration. We are oscillating between something that we don't want to remember and something we wish to forget. We are moving between the quiescent motions that happen in the dark and the staging of imperialism. This notion of withholding time, maybe if you want to riff on anything I said.
Well, I think you and I have spoken about it too, but the sense of, you can see the older trees there, and different situations created of villages and these people forced to perform. So the only thing that triggered it, of course, is the Macau gate, which they clearly restored and left. But no one I met, and I met film directors, producers, nobody knew anything about the garden, including the museum where I was showing. And actually it was the Unfinished Conversation exhibition, the power plant, that I was part of with John Acumpra, Steve McQueen, Zeneb Sedira. That show was at the Musée Berardo, and that's actually why I was there for those 2 weeks. They knew nothing about it. So it's kind of interesting. And if someone does go to Lisbon and visits, the garden's was closed after I was there for, I think, 5 years, and now it's been restored. But the images I did see were complete whitewashing, or like it looks like Disneyland or a theme park.
Okay. So I'm going to continue reading. Do you mind if I do that back and forth?
Yeah, no, that's great.
So in looking at her work, I decided to sort of break down the dimensions of what I was seeing in the slow image. And what I found is that there were several kind of categories of what I think she was doing. And the first is what I would call wayfaring. So I'm suggesting the Keeley strategy of lingering in slow cinema, just as filmmakers like Tarkovsky, Bresson, Tsai Ming-liang, who are inspired, they're inspired by 3 gestures. And these 3 gestures are wayfaring, prospecting, and the laying down of a ritual. This is what I see in the form. So wayfaring. Wayfaring is neither an organized map nor explicitly a method. It is an entrance into an encounter where you catch a flow and follow a sort of improvised map. At a certain point in the improvised journeying, wayfaring, there is a feeling of a kind of animate energy regarding specific locales. You follow a path, a non-path through these locales. You encounter by encounter, texture by texture. There are specific sites that throb with a particular charge, emitting what feels like signals, what we might call waypoints. With wayfaring, we are talking about a form of perception that looks to the side and not ahead. It is an entangling of body and world where perception is embodied. Similarly, in Keeley's Jardin de Ultramar, there is an errant walk. It is at once a navigation and an unnavigation through spaces. But moreover, there is a dwelling in the atmospheres, and it is embodied. The garden, once a place where one might find containment, now takes on the air of immersion. The world is perceived as a continuously unfolding set of interior landscapes. In Keeley's work, walking becomes a sort of tuning. In Keeley's work, there is an attunement to the breadth and mirth of the gardens, to its interior landscape. In Stalker, the field is not mapped. In Tarkovsky's Stalker, the field is not mapped. It is inhabited. And to see means to dwell means to see. Wayfaring is about dwelling in the thickness of the path itself. It is improvised, it is porous, it is embodied. There is an openness to the encounters that emerge moment by moment. This is wayfaring. This is the notion of errantry, which is close to wayfaring. So what do you think about this idea of wayfaring?
Well, I like that too, that when you speak about that thickness of space you mentioned, that energy was there. I mean, whether it comes out or not from this, that was part of my compulsion to keep going back, was these sort of, like a mise en scène, these, not just the buildings, but these like almost like settings. And of course, they were like stage set props that are still there, like the grotto with the staircase. People were forced to perform, I don't know how often a day, in that space. So, you know what I mean? It didn't make sense because it wasn't a Baroque garden with a grotto. It was, so there were all these, not clues, but I think you're right. It's like this energy and this layering and something very ominous about it. But, you know what I mean? I just could feel it, but...
It's the thickness of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, social geographers call it thick space.
And that's why when Mani gave his performance and improvisation here with the film, quite a few people mentioned haunting or spoke about energy they felt coming from the film, but it's also just exactly what I was feeling in that space.
One of the things that I notice is in Tarkovsky's Stalker, the zone is not a space to be crossed, but it is a space that enters into the walker. Can you speak a little bit about how this enters into us rather than us entering into it? Did it enter into you?
It did, and I think that that's why I feel, or I hope, and it is a slow film, almost 3 hours, but the viewer becomes me walking through the garden. Again, I'm saying that, but it is that simple, so that they start pondering or thinking, what's going on here? Because you can see it's not just a botanical garden on many, it's that, I think it's the deep space, but it's also this layering, and I think that gardens, the politics of gardens are really interesting because depending on their age, I've realized looking internationally, they are appropriated. And the fact that Salazar in this project specifically chose that garden to be his celebrating the colonial empire is interesting. And I was told by someone that actually Hitler was there for the parade, the opening, and the king from the Congo was there, and there was like not a cart, I guess, a thing, and they said with a zebra pulling it. Whether this is fact or not, but that was, I read that or was told something about that. But again, the archives of this are really suppressed because one artist I did meet in Lisbon when I did the show, whose work is really interesting, she told me too that because the Carnation Revolution happened only in 1974 with Salazar, when they got away from the fascist dictatorship, the colony, the whole archive of the colonies was not a priority because there was enough poverty and issues within Portugal itself. So, you know, it's never really also been really looked at. I'm sure people now are, but that's why I'm saying even in the 10 years since, or 11 years since I made the film, more and more information emerges that you see about the space of the garden.
I'm kind of obsessed with this character, the exhausted detective. Maybe we can speak a little about that, but first I'm going to read the section on prospecting. So again, we're talking about slow cinema. We're talking about her having a slow image. The first thing I see her doing is wayfaring, as I just read before. The second thing she does is prospecting. Prospecting is a gathering of traces. There is no interest in domination or extraction. Prospecting is the gathering of remnants left behind by time's dominant rhythm, those traces that are left behind. In prospecting, we are not speaking about imperialism's gaze, but rather a slow and gathering eye. It looks at the unsaid, the unseen. It sifts through the dustbin of history. It is a piecing together of parts left behind. Prospecting can be considered premonitional in the sense of being a sort of incantation that encompasses not just what we are seeing and collecting, but also what we might see. Aspects of divination may be invoked here. Her gaze is an investigative gaze that scans but does not name. Keeley entrusts that we are naming what will eventually be that the naming will eventually be done. For now, it is a moment to gather those that are left behind, those people that were in the zoo. The prospecting is a surveying of the major and the minor, objects and people without names that have not yet been named. It reveals the traces along the thread of time, things that are not correctly placed, the scattered, the rejects of official history. The slow walker prospects the most seemingly innocuous spaces, time, objects, a rusted lid, the dust. The slow walker in slow cinema prospects the threshold. There is a scattered desire to touch it all. In Keeley's Jardin de Ultramar, the prospecting is a kind of tuning. No zoom or other camera device. Rather, the camera lingers, it hovers, and it is tuning. She is not prospecting for a spectacle, but instead her images are looking for a particular quiet resonance, for what trembles just below visibility. Prospecting can have the air of premonitional in the sense of being a sort of incantation. It is a gathering of not what is present, but what might eventually emerge. What we have here is a dowser's rod. Her durational images act like this. They are tracing hardly visible lines and pointing and shaking at a hardly felt vibration of memory. She is not declaring, she is listening. Is this an act of historical divination, of speculative assemblage that trusts that the not yet named will emerge in time? Keeley's frames are prospecting for the lacunae in the archive. Hers is an infinite scanning, a divining rod that is not so much conjuring history as much as being with history. In the slow pan, there is an eternal stillness that gives us the room we need to lean back and think about the visual ethics we live with in our times. The prospecting.
Is that, and you had mentioned the detective, or, well, it's interesting because you didn't know the commission I had done for Colorestry in 2015 for the Unfinished Conversation, the show that then traveled to Portugal and Detroit. Ranjit Hosk, who's a critic who lives in Bombay, we had met when I did an exhibition, was in an exhibition in Bombay, but I invited him to do the writing for that exhibition. And it's interesting what you're saying, because he used those sort of exact words with the photographs that I'd taken in Kisangani, in what was then called Zaire, when Mobutu was in power. It was in 1983, so you absolutely weren't allowed to photograph anywhere, especially as a foreigner. But I had a very tiny Olympus, and I was fascinated by the architecture, the sort of what was left of the Belgium Art Deco buildings, etc. I mean, I showed that to you last night. But he used those sort of similar words, that surreptitious, or he was curious in my obsession of photographing those buildings. And, you know, Raoul Peck, when I met him, who actually grew up there, he told me that, again, the buildings are all destroyed since then because of the terrible conflict in eastern Congo. So, you know, I think it's done in a quiet way, but it's interesting that kind of, I don't know what it is, why we're compelled to document certain images or...
But don't you think there's a ritualistic aspect to this also? Because the third thing that I see that you're doing, first there's the wayfaring, and then there's the prospecting. But I find something ritualistic also. Is there a ritual that you're trying to lay down? Is there something ritualistic almost?
Well, I wouldn't think, I guess for me, it's just instinctive or a response. I follow my instincts, and when I choose to film or photograph, it's not all the time, and I'm clearly not a photojournalist, or, you know what I mean? It's completely subjective, I think, or it's just more, I don't think of it that, but it's compelling, right? Everyone, they weren't laughing, but everyone was like, noticed the obsession with his garden when I was there. But I don't know. I just follow it. I don't question it.
So I'm just going to read one of the last parts here. So again, I've tried to break down I guess we could say the dimensions of her slow cinema, first into the wayfaring, then into prospecting. But then the third thing is that I see her laying down a ritual. Moving through the solid state of time and space into a corner of stillness and supplication, having moved through it all, seen it all, what is left but to lie in wait and supplicate, to lie prostrate in attendance, to let the water fall through you. The slow walker's action seems timeless, not so much visible, but a movement that itself are traces. This is what I see what she's doing. Traces of actions, of supplicating and ritual. Silent, non-verbal, the ritual and its stillness are enacted in the duration. She's moving through a dense material of time and space in a journey that is less about moving forward than about arriving at a certain stillness, at the proverbial corner of quiet surrender. In this case, to the image. I see it as what I would call secular reverence, obvious gestures that are not the stuff of slow cinema, that are the stuff of slow cinema. Rather, it is the shadow of gestures. I see her foreshadowing the gestural. Can we call it a trace before time? In the Taiwanese director Tsai Ming-liang's films, there is a lot of silent, nonverbal moments that show embodied devotion in stillness and in repetition. His characters metaphorically ritualize everyone and everything. There is a laying down of a secular ritual. It is not performed for it's not performed for the viewer. It happens in the textures of the duration. There is a stretching of time. And the act is felt, it's not shown. The image is felt, not shown. The ritual is spoken. This ritual is not spoken. It is held in the duration of looking. The images become incantations, traces of gestures left for the viewer to complete. We are positioned almost ritually into a posture of attentiveness. In Keeley's video, we have a kind of optical altar. Colonial residues are not represented or performed. They are slowly and deliberately witnessed. Keeley does not do this spectacularly. The metaphoric ritual is a spell of sorts. It's delivered in every slow shot. The images linger. We feel thresholds between them. Keeley asks us to consume, but not to consume, but to inhabit the images' afterlives. This is the metaphoric secular ritual. Her images murmur and haunt. In this secular ritual are transparent lyrics, imbibing an optical and conscious, telling us to look under the surfaces, under time, under how time still colonizes us. So that's kind of the end of the text in a way. Any riffs on that?
Well, it's interesting the word you use, afterlives, because I think that was the title actually of Rangi's text. But it's, maybe it is this haunting or, I feel like I draw with the camera, so my practice is really about drawing. It always has been. But it's interesting what you're seeing. Yeah, it's this repetitive, it's the moving with the camera, but it's also a way of understanding or seeing. And clearly it is with the body because it's handheld. I've never been interested. Obviously I'm not using a tripod because it's not still. It's me moving and some form of, I guess, exploring or learning. But the repetitiveness to me isn't really repetitive because of the light, space, changing in the garden, even after it rained. So even the space changed, but it was more that notion of exploring and sort of looking at, well, what's going on here, or the vestiges of what was left.
Okay. So continuing also with the exhausted detective, Bresson speaks of capturing inner movement through the image. In Jardin d'Outremer, the camera often holds at length. What kind of inner movement or inner landscape are you hoping to reveal or allow the viewer to inhabit? What do you want them to enter into here?
Well, I mean, I don't have a plan. I just hope they can sink into the image. But if they do stay with it, then thinking more, and then there is the information in the case, but I'm comfortable with people taking whatever they take from it. There isn't like a program I have. It's more sinking into a particular time and space, I think.
And is there a reason why that's necessary now? Last night we saw Claire Denis' film. Is there a reason why that's necessary now? Why is this necessary? Why do we have to be lingering? Is it necessary? Are you asking too much of the viewer?
I don't think so, but I like very much that word that you used. I think that we saw this film last night by a director that we both really like, and it was very violent, and so it led to an interesting conversation. I think the era we live in and what we're subjected to and real activity, what's going on in the world, it was really too much, this aggressivity or violence in the movie. And I won't get into another film I did see, an Italian film, but how do I articulate it? That quietness, or this other film did very much what I think Claire Denis was trying to do with her film, but this film did it in an extremely, I don't want to say gentle manner, because Adelina saw the film with me, but it was the rise of fascism in Italy, and it was really interesting. It was very political, in a way, far more than hers was. And it wasn't gentle, but it was more, I don't know, do we all need to be hit over the head with things when reality and the politics of the moment we're living in is so strong and intense? So this was obviously made in 2016, but all of the things you've said are sitting there in that space. They didn't get cleaned up, even someday if I visited, so-called renovated. Whether there's signage now, but it looks like they've removed a lot of what was there. What can I say? This was the room for coffee. Okay. So this showed, without signage, that the people going out into the colonies, Angola, Mozambique, would come and learn how to grow, and were skilled and told how to, you know what I mean? This was the agricultural element you mentioned that the garden was used for.
Okay. Now, I'm interested in this idea of atmospheres. The greenhouse is both a container and an imperial amphitheater. Let's speak a little bit about atmospheres. How do you capture atmospheres? Because your pictures in Zaire, which are not here, but they're to me, there's a lineage between this and Zaire. So how does somebody capture atmospheres? What does it even mean for you to, because that's what I see in my writing. I'm writing about the atmospheres, and I'm saying that we need to realize that colonization is about atmospheres, and we need to start decolonizing them. Do you want to speak a little bit about atmospheres?
Well, yeah, and I liked what you had brought up because of that early piece that I'd shown you in the Dia book that Martha Rosler did, the hotel room, where I had worked with Fanal's text from The Wretched of the Earth, or part of it. I thought that was really interesting what you were saying, James, too, about Fanal and this sense of, not phenomenology, but this also sense of embodiment. And I think
it's people are losing touch of what he did.
And what was that, or what were you feeling that how it's misread or focused in other ways? There was a sense of embodiment, no, or a...
the work is about his Black Skin White Mask is about embodiment,
Right.
and it's about disembodiment. And if somebody actually sits here and watches this properly, there's a form of embodiment that happens, and also kind of disembodiment.
Well, and also perhaps that's it, where it comes into you, in your body, or you know what I mean, that time-space thing where you experience, how did I feel those things in this garden without reading anything about it?
Yeah.
That was sitting there in the space or embedded in it. And whether people call it ghosting or it's more, it's an interesting area, and it's hard to articulate. You're a writer, I'm not, but that's why it meant a lot to me when we met and your response to the work, because I'm not an academic. And a lot of why I do this is because, I have conceptual ideas, but this sort of overwhelmed me. It didn't consume, you know what I mean? It was, there were the rooms, but it was so layered, and that's obvious, and it's like, well, what's being hidden here, or why is there's sort of this continual layering on top of a space.
Let's talk about our way of seeing, and let's get into our generation. The club became a hallucinatory sensorium. It trained us, being in the club scene, it trained us to look discontinuously at things. And an embodiment. Let's talk a little bit about our generation being in club life, being in slow cinema. Am I correct in saying that we have maybe a different way of seeing the world because of that life we led back then?
Well, I had never really thought of it, but when you brought it up, I think it's really true. In the sense of getting lost, and we didn't really do drugs. It was more that experience of the body and the amazing DJs in New York, but also that time space too, and the surrounding with people, and maybe speaking of ritual and all those things, a lot of the times when I was in those clubs, and latterly with Stephen, who's here, was with us sometimes. That was with cultural theorists looking back on it, or people, but it was more, I guess, was it getting lost? It's that simple, or, again, I think you articulate it better than I do, but the slow cinema, I first, my friend, the reason partially I moved to New York was my friend was doing his PhD at NYU with Annette Mickelson on film, and he was doing it on gesture and movement in Robert Bresson's films. And I did not know Robert Bresson's films till he introduced them to me. Then when I moved to New York, I would go to the Thalia all the time, or I saw the films, and this is back when you had to see a film. This is pre-video. And so they really spoke to me and moved me. And then there was was Tarkovsky, Ozu, the list goes on. But what do you feel about that connection between the two yourself? Because you kind of made that.
I'm going to read some excerpts that I wrote about it. So the club became a hallucinatory sensorium. You were trained to think discontinuously and with synesthesia. It resulted in a cinema of the body. We were trained to see in fragments, to navigate in between, to listen as vision. So that's sort of some of the stuff that I was writing on it. I just think that we were trained in a different way of seeing.
Yeah, because we'd go for the whole night or a long time. I mean, it was immersive, and it wasn't about being picked up or any of that stuff. It was the best clubs were all the gay clubs, and we talked about that experience where we were, but I guess philosophers, people have written on it, right? I knew someone in France who did. He was a bit younger than me, but I don't, did you see it in a ritualistic sense yourself, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the club was a laboratory, and I think that we were trained in different ways of temporality. So that's why I brought it up. Like when we both found out we went to the same clubs in the 80s, and then the fact that we're both kind of lovers of slow cinema, I thought that there must be some sort of connection between it. I really feel strongly about it, and I think if we move on.
Yeah, I had never had any interest in humans or dialogue or narrative, any of that, never. Okay. And there are many other films that were made, but they were all things that I was engaged with, that I wanted to research almost or discover.
Speaking of that, I mean, let's talk about these referential films that this generation doesn't seem to be connected to them, like Sans Soleil. What did those mean for you? Were they thresholds, or the fact that these films, like, we had to see them back then, like The Society of the Spectacle. These were like benchmarks, things that were important for us to move forward. Do you think we're still living in a kind of a society where people are grasping onto those anchors that can really push us forward with our thinking?
Well, I can only say that I think what interests me a lot about Sans Soleil was the fact that he spoke about Africa and Japan, and because I had lived in Africa in 72, 1974, 75, but this long trip I did for a year overland in a truck, that was in 1983. Then I finally first went to Japan in 1985. So I found that film fascinating, and then I also Semiotex did the script of the film that he wrote, and I saw quite a relationship about what he was speaking about in that text, weaving in even the tale of Genji. So, I mean, again, I'm speaking a bit fragmented, but I think that it was allowing glimmers of things that, became, I think, very important for me with my work. And then just kind of opening doors where, you could pick up your camera and film. And I have small hands, so Super 8 was great. Forget video pack, all that stuff was too heavy. And then, so I made films in the 80s, but then I never made another film again until I used my cell phone in 2016 when I made this film. So a lot of it, I think, is just that sense of tactility or something you can pick up, and almost, I call them notebooks because it's almost referencing that. Instead of drawing, I'm doing it with film.
Yeah, we never talked about the drawing, but how the drawing is almost like a form of tracing, and you're kind of tracing everything that's in the garden, like it's kind of like a tracing. Do you consider this a kind of form of drawing in a way?
Yeah, and I'd say traces or vestiges because I never erase. I've always used like markers of black ink. I've never worked with pencils, and I've never erased. But I think my approach to drawing, too, is unusual. Or, I went to school during the conceptual era, so I studied at York University. But we never did figure drawing or any of these things. And the sense, it's interesting what you're saying about rites of passage and stuff. Because again, you didn't know, but I was studying anthropology originally at York. And also, I think some of those things were interesting more just for the culture and the timing, thinking of, especially when I was traveling, the importance of things that, you know what I mean? It was like the culture I was in, these sort of weren't priorities, and it was just, I think it was learning. I was young, so it was learning. And I mean, I got out of anthropology almost right away because it just seemed like the notion of it, because it was pre-Marxist anthropology, and the idea of it just seemed so foreign to me. You know what I mean? This concept of going further into it.
And getting back, I mean, we're talking a lot about embodiment. In Nostalgia, Tarkovsky's Candle Walker, if you remember the candle walk, becomes a metaphorical ordeal. Do you feel your durational images ask something of the viewer? A kind of slow endurance or witnessing that resists closure?
Maybe. I mean, I've been asked, but I've never shown the films in a cinema, and I have been asked in Germany, different Times museums have proposed it, and I didn't want that because I didn't want the viewer to feel a prisoner, captive in their seat, and go, oh hell, there's 2 more hours of this, or the idea. And also, I like that you stand, or your body is in relation to the films, the way I was when I filmed. So again, they aren't a cinema story. It's something very different, and so I didn't want ever to feel that people were prisoners stuck in this film that maybe bored them. But what I learned from the whole time this show's been on, I was so surprised right from the beginning after the opening that I'd come and people were actually sitting here and spending a lot of time in the films. I was very touched, but I of course through the summer thought, well, it's cool in here and it's cave-like, but I saw children too sitting there, and just the fact that people weren't looking at their cell phones alone taught me something. So this, like you had said, maybe it's just a space where people could sit and get lost or move in. How do I articulate, sink into the film?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to read another fragment that I wrote in response to this film. Stillness is an ultimate endurance, the body giving itself to one position. It is to bring the more than human into you and to offer yourself to it. This is not supplication to another power, but being with another. There is a gesture of pausing and humbling yourself before the more than human. I feel there's like some magic. I stayed here for I've seen almost the whole thing. It is arriving physically, spiritually, and perceptually. It is a willingness to stop moving, to just see, to name, to remain. The body receives and offers. It opens to the thickness of time. These are secular gestures. Being with this film is a secular gesture of reverence, rituals toward time, space, memory, cosmos. Not stillness, before, but stillness with what is unknowable, elemental, ancestral. We are quietly offering a view. We are walking. There is attention, there is body, there is breath. In Jadam de Ultramar, Keeley's camera attains stillness before space. It grounds itself in time. There are long, deliberate frames. She's not showing, but she's dwelling. Image after image is not narrative, but it is attunement, it is attuning. Keeley asks us to pause, stop, receive. Her walk is slow, and the camera embodies deep receptivity. It is attained through stillness. We are brought into the presence with the image. This is a bodily attainment of stillness. It is a choice to stay still and to absorb. Her camera refuses to bend before power, but relates to the garden's more than human elements. Elements that the colonial panopticon contained and distorted. It attunes to architecture's breath. It attains to the dust of history, to interrupted lives.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's in the panoptica. I mean, we won't get into that, but the people enforced to be in this garden, as if that wouldn't remain in the soil or the energy. But also you're right that Foucault's writing about it, but also this notion too of the heritopia, or the space that sort of tells you it is what it is, but very quickly you realize when you're in there. I mean, how could you have the busts alone and think that people are not going to kind of want to know, why are these here? What is, so it's very odd. And I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time in Portugal, but you have. But this idea of the things you brought up, you can't cover this up, or you can't just, unless you remove it all and destroy it, it's sitting right there to anyone who chooses to look. But that's a whole nother program, really. But
because to me, that's the resistance that's important. I mean, there's what I think you're offering, again, to break it down, is you're offering us a way of wayfaring. You're offering us a different way of seeing. You're offering us a way of prospecting. You're offering us to be still and to stay with the image and the laying down of a ritual. And I'm gonna read some fragments, because I think you're a slow walker. The second gesture in slow walking and slow cinema is laying down a ritual. It is a supplication. It is asking, demanding, not to higher power for what is due, but what is just. It's not pleading, but it is embodied insistence. Supplication is not literal, but ethical insistence. Fairness is sought, restitution is demanded. Slow cinema's camera asks for restitution. It is saying to history, this must be acknowledged. Supplication is the body as witness. It is invoking responsibility and not transcendence. Keeley's long takes and slow camera are a form of asking. What lingers in these colonial gardens? Forgotten voices, forgotten bodies. Her supplication is not theatrical, but atmospheric. She examines the innocuous and the important, the path, the plants, the peacock, the cryptotech. We are asked to stay with the invisible. In Keeley's work, questions arise. What will history give us? When will history give us what is due? When will it be remembered as reckoning? And her camera asks, what is owed to those that were once behind the glass of the vitrine of the zoo?
well, it also too, what was interesting is there was one person who was helping install when I did the show in the Berardo, and she had grown up in Angola, and her family stayed when the revolution, when many the Portuguese left. But it was interesting because she said to me right away, because on my phone it said Jardim do Tomar, because it was, I don't know what they called it. I don't know, whatever the word was. And she said to me, you know, that's a very racist term. And she said, that's so interesting, it's coming on your phone. And then she explained to me that Ultramar means, you know, away, those people from away.
It's like Auslander in Germany.
Yeah, I guess so, the colonies. So she spoke to me, she hadn't been to the garden or knew the history, but it was interesting that that just occurred because it appeared on my cell phone when I was filming. Yeah, well, I guess also, you know, the visiting of the garden. But I mean, it's interesting to see what is overlaid onto this, or what is admitted to, or left.
Do you yourself, because I mean you're the filmmaker, so maybe it's hard for you, but do you see an insistent on demanding history here? Like, because this is a demand of history. You're demanding for us to look at this garden, which is a human zoo. So there is a kind of ethical insistence. Do you see that from the outside?
I think so. I mean, I realized more when I returned, and I read, before I did the editing, but when I read the book of the anthropologist in Lisbon, and then finding out the history of these human zoos in Porto. But what was astounding is to think in 1940 that this occurred.
Yeah, and that there were still human zoos in 1940.
Exactly, yeah. And also, as she says, just what you had said earlier, what happened to those people?
Yeah.
That's a lot of people. Did they return home? Apparently there's nothing in the archives. And as she said, people must have died, people must have had children, like 135 people. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of vast to think of. But when I was there too, they were really promoting, you know, they had just, you probably saw that, they had just created that monument to, back down by the water, to exploration, and this thing of Vasco da Gama and the whole. So I think it's huge, that uncovering, and this is just in many ways a simple gesture, but I feel it's strong, and also just the...
Like the Zaire photos are definitely an ethical insistence on history. I mean, Raoul Peck's, you know, response to it. I think there's an ethical demand that's there, and but how
well, that was interesting, because when that show was done, I don't know if you saw it, but everything in the show were moving images, and there was a lot of sound. Obviously, Steve McQueen, the Jana Comfra. So my clerestory wall was a wall of 30 or 27 large vinyl photos that I had taken in Kisangani in 1983. And so when there was the colloquium for the Unfinished Conversation exhibition, Tina Camp came, and it was the first time I'd met Tina. But Tina was fascinated by the photographs, because a lot of people had commented, you know, that mine was the still, quiet, the wall, the notes on obsolescence, and that, you know, the rest was all moving image. And she kind of said, these images are screaming or shouting. Are you not seeing it? It was really interesting, and I hadn't read
It's like a silent scream.
What's that?
It's like a silent scream.
Yeah, so she kind of brought that up and discussed it in relation to the photographs. But yeah, maybe also too, we all see things in our own way. So I don't know what people's feelings were about, other than I saw people sitting here for quite a while and immersing themselves. So whether they read, you know, when they came out, that to me is everyone's individual story. I don't demand that at all. Whatever they take from it is fine with me. Yeah.
Again, my experience as a viewer, obviously it's my personal experience, and again, my experience with this was that I saw the wayfaring, I saw the prospecting, I saw the laying down of the ritual. I felt like I was supplicating to the image, not in a religious way, in a kind of a secular ritualistic way. I felt like I was, I also felt like there was a sense of prostration. The third gesture of prostration is the most radical. It is a complete letting go of time and space. That's how I made myself look at this. To lie prostrate is to fall, arms akimbo, soaking in the ground and sky. It is the ultimate letting go. It is a mise en abîme through space and time. Through prostration in front of this image, not as a spectacle, but as being with the image, because that's, to me, what's important, is to commune with the image, because right now, in the spectacular society we're in, people are looking at the image, they're not with the image. So, through prostration, we discover a time beneath time. The body surrenders not to power, but to time itself. It is immersed in the image. So I'm presenting something a bit radical. I mean, it's a little crazy, the secular, I mean, I'm pushing the secular sort of like ritual.
Yeah, but I'm going to tell you, you love this because Adelina filmed it. When Mani did his improvisation over here to this film, towards the end, I think, a little girl was in the doorway, and she did exactly what you said. She walked right in, and she lay down on the floor, and she was rolling. She did a whole piece. I'll show it to you. It's on my phone. And at the end, then she just, was like staring at the film, but she came really close, and she just did it. I don't know how old she was, but it's interesting what you said. She just completely rolled, got right into it.
So we are invited to lie beneath and above the accumulated colonial time. The images hold us in place. It's not a passive gaze. It's not voyeuristic, but it's a gaze soaked in time, falling into time, challenging time. Immersion in images discovers the essence of time. This is a lingering, this is a slow time, this is slow cinema. So let's talk about immersion, because on the one hand you have the Van Gogh immersive theater, that you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
these
I've never
immersive
gone,
things. But this is immersive also. What would be the difference between this kind of immersion and having the Van Gogh or the Jackson Pollock or whoever Disney fantasy immersive art pieces? Because this is an immersion also.
Well, yeah, and I specifically wanted it. The space is so incredible. That's why I chose the film to rest on the concrete floor, right? So it kind of merged as a wall. I guess maybe connecting with my wall drawing, but also I think it's my sense of architecture space. So yeah, I mean it's beautiful. Out of all the times it's been screened, this is incredible. It's also the power of the projector. But yeah, I like a lot the reflection onto the floor and the incorporating of the space and the floor into it. So it's not just a film projected up above, it's sort of integrated into the space. And I guess just quickly that for me, and I think it was 1979 when I first discovered that sense of Ma and that collapse of time.
Can you say that louder about Ma?
Sorry, that collapse of time and space.
This is called Ma, right?
Yes, it's on the wall outside, but it was when I saw the Izozaki exhibition at the Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York in 1979, I think. It called Ma, Space and Time in Japan. Okay. And so that was before I ever went to Japan, but it had a profound effect on me. What that notion means, and that's why the book I gave you from the Peabody Essex Museum, a Japanese curator chose to write an essay about my work or to talk to about Ma, Space and Time.
Okay. How much time do we have left? 5 minutes? 5 minutes? I mean, I don't know if people want to ask questions, or we weren't supposed to do that, but. Anything else?
Well, thanks everyone for coming. Thank you, James.
I mean, I would ask maybe a last question. I mean, what is it that pulled you to sort of like become part of my essay also in a way? Because when I say become, like, that actually you felt that I was understanding the work. What is it that you saw in the work?
Well, that would be my vast thesis. I just think it's amazing. We don't know each other really. I mean, James came to see my exhibition, the opening, but you completely connected. And it's fascinating. So I've learned so much from what you wrote. Thank you so much, because I'm not an intellectual and I don't write. I mean, I do my work, but it's as if you entered completely my practice, or what, and that, how rare that is for an artist. It's really rare.
Because for me, I mean, there's a lot of intellectual words, a lot of that, but it comes down to my embodiment with the film. It comes down to me spending time in the gallery and being with it, and starting to be in it. Obviously, as a academic, as an artist doing art history writing, there's words that we use, etc. But it really comes down to this. It comes down to this, and for me, you've opened up a language for me to look at how I look at cinema, and how it has this expansive breadth, which I forgot because I hadn't been watching slow cinema for years, but I've started to watch it again. And for me, it opened up a space of time for me, like a pocket of time where I could actually say, okay, I'm working with a filmmaker named Henri, and, looking at scenes, looking at what is it that we want in the scene? What is it that we want in our life? How do we open up this pocket of time? And for me, coming here to this film and all the writing I've been presenting, which is either, somewhat academic, etc., it's really about opening up this space-time for me. And that's what you've done for me. Really opened up this pocket so that I could explore these ideas, I think the wayfaring is important. It's important in people's lives, to be able to just go out into the world and wayfare and be errant and not have a path, and that's to me what's important here. It's important to prospect and to go out without, a plan and just go out and prospect. It's important to be before an image without being having it be a spectacle. So for me, it opens up these forms of embodiments, and that's why I've used these terms, but beyond the terms, these are real actions that I'm implementing in my life.
Well, that's really interesting. I think the importance of the slowness and the quieting down. Obviously, to draw, you have to do that, but it's more, maybe that's being lost, or I don't know.
But being lost is like something that I've missed. I've missed being lost in the image. That's why I did all this writing, because this errancy is my mentor Glissant spoke about this errancy, this getting lost is also being found in some ways, but it's a real critical tool of resistance.
Well, I also want that, I don't know how to say it, that openness. There isn't a program, there isn't someone hitting you over the head or telling you I know in any of the films. It's more, the Stuttgart notebook you didn't see, but all the things you spoke about were really what that film was about. Whether it was the library or the Natural History Museum or the living zoo and the plant specimens, those notions of classification and ordering and how that was used as well. So.
Wonderful. Yeah?
Thank you, James.
That was just beautiful. It was one of the best talks that I've been to quite some time.
Thank you, James.
Do you want to come up because we can't really hear you? Oh, yeah.
I'll borrow.
There we go. Yeah.
Just quickly, that was one of the best conversations I've been engaged with in a long time, so thank you. And I'm familiar with Sheilagh's work, this work in particular, because we showed it at the Museum of Contemporary Art where I work. And what you brought to the film for me through writing was astonishing. So thank you for that. Also, as a museum director, to have people talk and spend time in museums and not always have to be hit over the head with something that's grandiose and, always something new, constantly bombarded with imagery, and to be able just to be here and see the film and you talk about spending so much time in here, that's remarkable. And I think we need to do more of that in museums and spend time and look and learn and not just everything being fast-paced.
I mean, yeah, we need to decolonize them.
Exactly.
And make it a space where you should be, I remember in New York, I don't think you were, I think you had probably left, but once the Austrian embassy rented like a kind of a warehouse, and it had no purpose. Like, you could just go there, and they had exhibitions sometimes, but this sense that you can go into a space and have this secular sort of ritualistic thing that I'm pushing, which might sound a little religious, but it's not. It's a secular relationship I have to the image, which Shelagh has reminded me about.
Yeah, I love that idea of ritual though too, because I didn't really think
Of the what?
that about ritual as it relates to this film. Just the ritual of walking and seeing and being slow, and it's beautifully spoken. So thank you.
Super.
It's also I think too, historically, it's the reason for gardens, right? A sense of openness of space. And I think it really is important to rethink in the sort of madness of the moment and the art of the spectacle. I don't want to get back to De Boer and whatever, but I mean, oh my God, we're living in the midst of it, even in the politics. So,
and it's about this like relationship to the more than human, which is what the garden is about, but also watching the film brings you into that relationship with the more than human, which is obviously something we definitely need right now, desperately.